Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my Charlotte Pokemon TCG regional tier list. Charlotte Regionals is going to be happening this weekend and is expected to be the biggest regional ever. So today I'm going to be going over my current thoughts on the format and what decks I think are going to be the top performers. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let's hop right into it. So starting off here, we're going to start with the deck that has been getting quite a lot of talk recently as it's been consistently performing at the top. Charizard is still a very powerful deck, was able to win San Antonio regionals. Azul Garcia Grego was able to win San Antonio, and then it also saw success with Azul once again, getting top 8 at Portland. I think the deck is still very good. I think that the meta has been kind of shifting to be a little bit more hostile for it, with decks like Giratina gaining a lot of popularity, decks like Inteleon Urshifu still roaming around, Gardevoir as well, all kind of difficult matchups for the deck if they're able to set up against Charizard. I think the deck kind of peaked. I think the deck as of right now has peaked in San Antonio with obviously the regional win, and I kind of expect it to, kind of go on a downturn over the next couple of tournaments as the metagame starts to shift kind of to beat Charizard. I think Charizard actually has a decent amount of rough matchups as of right now, with things like Snorlax also seeing a lot of play. I think that it is in a kind of interesting spot as of right now. It's such a powerful deck, it can beat pretty much anything, but it actually has quite a few difficult matchups. So as of right now, I think it makes a solid play, but it's a deck that you're not going to necessarily get a whole lot of free wins with. You're going to pretty much have to fight versus everything, as pretty much everything is 50-50 to slightly unfavored actually right now for the deck. So as of right now, Charizard is an incredibly powerful deck. Just fundamentally, it does what it needs to do. It can take advantage of players who don't set up a lot of these matchups that are really close. If your opponent stumbles for one turn, Charizard is incredibly good at pouncing on those opportunities. So I would say it's a great deck with a lot of difficult matchups as of right now, but it has a shot versus most things, and I think that's a reason as to why it's still going to see success. Next up, we got Lost Zone Giratina. Lost Zone Giratina, I think right now, is the best deck in the standard format. It pretty much has a shot versus everything. We saw in Portland a few weeks ago, John Ang was able to take down that regional championship, and also Sam was able to get second place. There was lots of them in top 1632, just lots in day 2 in general. The deck did very well. It has decent matchups versus most things. Giratina is just an incredibly powerful card. I mean, Lost Impact is a great attack. Star Requiem paired up with Roxanne is just ridiculous. You have Path of the Peak as well. It has everything that a top tier deck needs. The only problem sometimes the deck is a little bit inconsistent, but I think as people have kind of refined the list, the deck definitely sets up enough of the time, in my opinion, for it to be considered the strongest deck. Because Giratina's biggest question mark always was its consistency. I don't think there was ever a doubt on the power level of the deck. However, a lot of people preferred to play decks like Lost Zone Toolbox with, more focused on Sableye, Iron Hands, Roaring Moon, Radiant Charizard, those other, box type Lost Zone decks, as opposed to Giratina, just because of, largely due to the consistency. But over time, I think people have, kind of refined the lists, and I definitely like Giratina as of right now. Has a shot versus everything, and it's definitely really good, and I expect to see a lot of play and a lot of success as well. It's just an incredible deck. Next up here, we're going to do Gardevoir. Gardevoir is still a very powerful deck. The biggest problem with Gardevoir that it actually has is its prizes are brutal. The deck is very reliant on not prizing Kirlia, which is the biggest problem with the deck. The deck can just lose games even to favorable matchups if you prize Kirlias. So that is, kind of one of the problems with this deck. Kind of like an old deck in the past called Greninja Break that saw a lot of success. Greninja Break was a deck that if you prized any of the Frogadiers, your deck felt really bad at times. However, if you did not and you had them all in your deck, the deck felt incredibly powerful and really had a shot versus everything. Gardevoir is kind of the same way, where if you don't prize any of your Curliers, your deck feels absolutely incredible. However, if you do prize your Curliers, even just one, a lot of your matchups that are 50-50 kind of start to become slightly unfavorable. For example, something like DTMU I think is about a 50-50, maybe just slightly favored for Gardevoir. However, if you prize a Curlier, I think that matchup flips to a slightly unfavored matchup. So Gardevoir is still very good. It's kind of the deck that if you just set up, you can't really lose to anything. Like if you fully set up, it's, so easily able to just like checkmate your opponent with, like your board state. You just draw so many cards. Things like Giratina can still miss off an Iono. Things like Charizard can still miss the pieces to put together, like another Charizard off Iono. Even decks like Mew can still miss. Gardevoir, if it fully sets up, it can just almost deck itself out really quickly, and it's just really, difficult to beat. Next up, let's do Snorlax Stall. Snorlax Stall has been getting a lot of talk recently. I think its matchup versus Giratina is significantly better than people give it credit for. A lot of Giratina players are cutting Iono, which makes the matchup actually much closer because you build these giant hands because you can't get hand disrupted. I think if you play maybe an extra Sydney, you could even, like, you know, add your Fortune Sister count a little bit up to try and help Giratina. I don't think the Giratina matchup is unwinnable. I think it's probably 40-60 if they don't play Iono. If they do play Iono, it's really bad, but if they don't play Iono, I do think that you have a shot. It has a good Charizard matchup. It has a good Gardevoir matchup if they don't tech super heavily for you. If they play Toro, Palpad, and stuff, like also Collapse Stadium, the matchup is definitely difficult, but I do think that if they don't have all of those tech cards, the matchup is fine. The deck is okay into Mew, really close matchup there. It's really good into an Inteleon. It's good into just pretty much a lot of decks. It's good into Miraidon as well. However, I think the biggest problem with it can be ties at times, and also if your opponent knows exactly what to do against Stall, a lot of your matchups become quite close. You get a lot more pressure put on you, but the deck also, you know, looking at the other way, has a really good advantage of, you know, taking advantage of players that don't know what they're doing. You know, I think Stall is a deck that not everyone has practiced against, which means that you can, you know, kind of get free wins, you know, versus players who, you know, don't necessarily know what they're doing versus the deck. So I think the deck is good. I think it's very solid for this event. I do think that it has a decent Tina matchup if they do not play Iono and they don't play perfectly, but if they know exactly what they're doing, they play perfectly, they understand how to manage their resources, and they also like play Iono, the matchup can be quite difficult. So overall, Lax is good, but definitely can struggle versus players that know what they're doing. Moving on here, we'll do Inteleon Urshifu. Inteleon Urshifu is a deck with very polarizing matchups. You can hit some specific decks and be like, cool, I'm just going to set up and win. Or you can hit some specific decks where you set up perfectly and you just get ran over. For example, decks like Mew VMAX, no matter how well you draw, that matchup is atrocious, versus things like Snorlax's as well. No matter how well you draw, if they set up, you're not in a good spot. So the deck is, you know, kind of the opposite of decks like Giratina, Charizard, and Gardevoir, where those decks kind of always have outs. This deck, you know, doesn't necessarily always have outs. However, if you hit those decks like, you know, Gardevoir with the deck, or Charizard, or, you know, a lot of these, you know, smaller HP Lost Zone decks, you can just run them over, and there's really not a whole lot that they can do if you're able to set up. So overall, it's a very matchup-based deck. Biggest problem with it, but I do think it has decent matchups, especially with Giratina expected to continue to rise in popularity. That actually is a pretty solid matchup in general. It's close though. I'd say it's probably about 50-50, maybe slightly favored for Urshifu. Okay, moving on, we got both the Mew decks. I'm gonna put Mew actually quite high up here. I'm gonna put Fusion Mew above DT Mew. I think Fusion Mew has a higher ceiling. It is more inconsistent than DT Mew, but I think its ceiling is higher. I think DT Mew has a higher floor. I think it's the safer variant, but if you're looking to get risky, Fusion Mew is definitely very good for this event. It does better into Stall than DT Mew does. It does better into Lost on Giratina, in my opinion, slightly better than DT Mew does. It also, in my opinion, has a okay Charizard matchup because you can also still just Judge Path, Box a Disaster. I personally play 2 Judge in my Fusion Mew list. I kind of play a much more hybrid build that, you know, has, you know, like enough like hand disruption to, you know, turn into a DT Mew build versus Charizard when it needs to. So I think the deck is fine. I think they're both very good. And I expect them both to see success. But when it comes to tournament winning potential, I think definitely if a Fusion Mew player pops off and draws, you know, really well, the deck is pretty difficult to beat. It can kind of just run people over, and there's not a whole lot that the opponents can do. Moving on, let's go Lost Box. I think Lost Box is still quite good. This is just going to be like the Paradox Box list with things like Roar and Moon, Iron Hands, Kyogre, all those types of things. I think it's very solid. Kyogre gives you a lot of outs versus different decks. Iron Hands is good versus one prize decks. Like Roaring Moon is good versus decks like Charizard, you know, Urshifu when you need to take those big one-shot KOs. It's just solid in general. The other Lost Box deck is Lost Box Charizard. I think that this version is weaker than the other version. I think just Kyogre is still really good, and this version is also a lot more limited, as really your only attackers are Cramorant, Sableye, and Charizard, as opposed to the other builds of Lost Box that are a little bit more versatile. So, you know, Radiant Charizard is still definitely a good card in general. It was able to win the Stuttgart Regional Championships. Christian Fontenot was able to win that, and the deck still has, you know, seen some success. So I think the deck is good, but I personally prefer the Kyogre build as of right now, just because of the options, and you can get a little bit more aggressive early game, as opposed to Lost Box Charizard, which is not able to as consistently do that, in my opinion. Next, I've got Miraidon Flaffy. I think Miraidon is still really good. I think it gets better, especially with Giratina seeing a lot more success. Iron Hands is good versus decks like Gardevoir and the Lost Zone Engine decks as well. And Taillion Urshifu is actually not that bad of a matchup. If you play double Mew, I think you're actually totally fine against that deck. The Mew matchups are definitely rough. The Charizard matchup is, you know, quite iffy. If you play Path, you can brick them with Judge Path, but overall, I think Miraidon's just a really solid deck as of right now. I think it has a chance versus most decks, and Iron Hands is pretty good as well. So Miraidon, definitely a good play, I think, for this event. Especially with Charizard, I think, expecting to go down a little bit in popularity. I think that Miraidon definitely gets better. Let's go on to Chien-Pao Excalibur. Chien-Pao, I think, is a tier B deck. It's not terrible, actually, as of right now. It has a decent Charizard matchup, has a decent Gardevoir matchup as well. Definitely can beat most things when it sets up. The biggest problem is that it kind of is a glass cannon deck. When it sets up, it's incredibly powerful, but there's just some games where you just completely fall apart and the deck just feels awful. So that's, you know, the biggest thing holding Chien-Pao back. But I think it's a little bit better right now than people give it credit for. I think it's kind of sneaking its way back into the format. We did see one in top 32 of Portland Regionals. Jared Grimes was able to see success with that. So the deck is now, you know, kind of seeing a little bit more success recently. And I do think it's kind of on the upward like trend as of right now. Next up, we got Goldango. I think Goldango is actually quite good. Goldango has been getting a lot of talk recently. I think it is quite solid. Goldango has been doing pretty well in online tournaments. It actually has a really solid Charizard matchup and also Miraidon matchup. Gardevoir as well is actually winnable because you can use Cross-Switcher canceling Cologne, Radiant Greninja, because you do have Palkia, so you can Star Portal onto the Greninja. And your deck already plays Cross-Switchers and Pokestops anyway, so you can pull off that Cross-Switcher canceling Cologne play. So I think the deck is decent. I think it's more iffy matchups are things like Giratina and Mew, but if you're able to hit a bunch of Charizards and Miraidons, you definitely will see, or you have a good chance of seeing success. So I think the deck is solid, and I would not be surprised to see it see quite a bit of surprising success, I think, to a lot of people. I don't think it'll be necessarily like super surprising because I think the deck is, you know, really going on the upward trend and definitely has that potential, but I definitely think it's going to catch some people potentially off guard. So Arceus tier C deck, very respectable, kind of just okay versus everything. You know, Judge Path is still very good, and I definitely expect it to see some success. I actually think the Venusaur variant and the Superior variant are a little bit better than the Regigigas variant. I actually like those variants. They actually do pretty decent against Charizard, and if you're able to Judge Path Giratina enough, Giratina can just kind of brick against you. So your deck is decent, but you know, the biggest problem with Arceus is, you know, those very early turns, the deck is just very shaky sometimes, especially on that first turn. If you don't find energy, games get very rough as you cannot get an energy onto an Arceus. So yeah, deck is still decent. I'm gonna put it in tier C as of right now. Snorlax Pidgeot, I think, is just worse Snorlax Stall, the non-Pidgeot version, because it has a worse matchup against Giratina, which is not good. Yeah, definitely a tough matchup versus Giratina. It's, I just think, kind of the worst variant in most respects. Pidgeot is cool, but I think that the Snorlax Stall variant that Calvin Connor and a few other players have been seeing success with, I think, is definitely the version that I prefer over the ones that people like Hale and Liam Halliburton as well have both been, you know, seeing some success with. I do think that the like regular version is a little bit better, just kind of in general. Anti-Iron Valiant we'll put in tier D. I don't think the deck is terrible. I just think that with a lot of players adding Jirachi into their deck, players kind of learning how to play versus it as well, it kind of is a deck where if your opponent is able to kind of get through that first turn or so of the game, your matchups don't feel great. You know, decks like Giratina, Charizard, Miraidon, and Gardevoir all aren't necessarily great matchups. Decks like Fusion Mew and DT Mew are tough matchups as well. So the deck doesn't necessarily just hard lose to everything, but it, you know, really is, you know, like relying on kind of stealing games early on, which is kind of the problem with the deck. Is if your opponent knows how to play versus it, knows how to kind of deal with those early turns of the game, then you can kind of struggle. So next up, we got Cloth. I will put Cloth in tier C. It's a fun deck, decent matchups versus some things. Is really good against Miraidon. Can beat Charizard as well, especially with Charizard cutting things like Radiant Charizard. Your Hisuian Electrode can put in work against Charizard too, so definitely some potential there. Roaring Moon as well, we'll put down here also. I think Roaring Moon actually is a little bit underrated. I think the deck is actually quite decent, especially with Charizard cutting Radiant Charizard. They can still use Heat Tackle though, but I think that matchup is a little bit closer because they're more reliant on two prizers nowadays. So overall, I think Roaring Moon is decent. The problem matchups are Gardevoir. Gardevoir is really rough. The Mew matchup is actually not great either, and I think those are, you know, some pretty difficult matchups. But I guess actually I'm gonna move it up a little bit. I don't think the deck is actually that bad. We'll put it behind Chien-Pao actually as of right now. It actually has or I had to jump out. It actually has some decent matchups here. In the format, and I definitely think that, you know, it is a very consistent deck. You know, what it loses in matchups, but it gains in consistency, kind of like what the turbo like Miraidon variants of the past, where you just kind of run your opponent over and just hope that it works. This is pretty much the same thing, and if your opponent does stumble, you can definitely catch people off guard. But anyways, that's gonna do it for the tier list. Let me know what you think of it in the comments. Let me know if you think that I missed any decks, and if you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. With that being said, this is Smart TCG. Thank you so much for all the support. I'll be at Charlotte Regionals as well, so if you see me, make sure to say hi if you want. And yeah, this is Smart TCG, and I'll speak with you again soon. Peace out, everyone.